Hello everyone, welcome to Boss Economic World. I'm your host. Today is November 20th, 2025. If you're watching this and you own a house, a pension, or simply use currency to buy food, I need you to put down the coffee and listen. Because the smell in the air right now? That's not autumn leaves. That is the smell of sovereign debt burning on a global scale. We have spent the last 3 years pretending that gravity doesn't exist. We've watched the global debt pile balloon to a staggering $74 trillion. We've watched corporations and governments go on a borrowing spree like a teenager with a stolen credit card in a Vegas casino, all to fund the AI revolution and green transitions. And now, the bill collector is knocking on the door. And he's not smiling. You remember Liz Truss, right? The British Prime Minister who lasted 44 days? The woman who was famously outlasted by a head of iceberg lettuce? We all laughed in 2022. We thought, oh, silly Brits, trying to cut taxes without paying for them. Well, the joke is over. Because what is happening in London right now and what is simmering in Tokyo and Washington suggests that the Liz Truss moment wasn't a glitch. It was a trailer for the horror movie we are currently living in. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of this financial onion. We're going to look at why billionaires are screaming fire, why the bond markets are staging a buyer's strike, and why your government, whether you are in the UK, the US, or Japan, might be about to lose control of the steering wheel. Let's get into the truth. Let's rewind the clock briefly to set the stage. September 2022. Liz Truss and her chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, unveil a mini-budget. They promised massive tax cuts funded by vibes and borrowing. The bond market looked at that math and vomited. UK gilt yields spiked vertically. Pension funds, which were using something called LDI, basically a fancy way of saying leveraged bets on boring bonds, almost imploded. The Bank of England had to step in and print money to stop the country from financially evaporating. Truss was fired. The lettuce won. Fast forward to today, late 2025. Mark Coombs, the CEO of Ashmore Group, a man who manages billions and doesn't sweat over small change, dropped a bombshell at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore. He said, quote, "If you are a country that's running deficits and relying on market access to do it, you get any kind of buyer's strike in parts of the curve." Let me translate that from billionaire speak to human speak. He is saying that the market isn't just going to ask for higher interest rates. He is saying the market might just stop answering the phone. A buyer's strike means the government holds an auction to sell its debt so it can pay nurses and fix potholes, and nobody shows up. Coombs is explicitly warning that the UK, and by extension, other deficit-loving nations, is definitely at risk of another Liz Truss moment. Now, why is he saying this now? Because last week, UK gilt slumped, meaning yields spiked again. Why? Because Chancellor Rachel Reeves, despite dropping plans to raise income tax rates, is still signaling that the government needs cash. Lots of it. And the market is looking at the UK's balance sheet and saying, I don't think you're good for it. But, of course, in economics, for every bear, there is a bull or at least someone trying to sell you something. At that same forum in Singapore, John Studzinski from PIMCO, another massive heavyweight in the bond world, disagreed. He said, I think you don't have another Liz Truss moment. You don't have a dollar shock, or whatever, if you're anticipating it. Studzinski's argument is the classic "we're too smart to fail" defense. He claims that the 2022 disaster was 1/3 Truss being reckless and 2/3 those pension funds being over-leveraged. He thinks because we know about the risks now, we won't step on the rake again. This is the most dangerous sentence in finance. It's different this time because we are watching. Let me ask you a question. If you see a train coming at you, and you stand on the tracks watching it, does the fact that you anticipate the impact stop you from getting flattened? No. Studzinski is ignoring the fundamental math. The buyer's strike Coombs is talking about isn't about surprise. It's about capacity. We have seen global bond sales hit a record $5.95 trillion in 2025 alone. Why? Because everyone is borrowing. Governments are borrowing to pay interest on old debt. Corporations are borrowing to build massive data centers for AI projects that may or may not make money for another 10 years. There is simply too much paper floating around. When supply floods the market and demand is shaky because inflation is sticky, the price of bonds collapses. And when bond prices collapse, yields skyrocket. That is the mechanic. It doesn't matter if you anticipate it. If you have $100 billion of debt to sell and only $50 billion of buyers, you have a catastrophe. Coombs pointed out something very specific that the mainstream media glossed over. He talked about the April tariff sell-off. Back in April of this year, there was a weird moment in the markets. The yield curve, usually a reliable indicator of risk, stopped behaving logically. Coombs noted there wasn't enormous amounts of buying at the long end. It didn't react exactly how everybody expected. This is technical, but stay with me. Usually, when things get scary, investors run to long-term government bonds because they are safe. In April, they didn't. They stayed in short-term cash. Why does this matter? It means the market is losing faith in the long-term solvency of governments. Investors are essentially saying, I trust the UK to pay me back in 3 months. I do not trust them to pay me back in 30 years because their spending habits are suicidal. When the long end of the bond market breaks, that is when you lose the ability to finance your country. That is the buyer's strike. And once confidence is gone, as Coombs said, it doesn't just reprice, you get a market shock. Part 4, The Global Contagion, Japan's Kamikaze Economics. Now, you might be sitting in New York or Toronto thinking, boss, I don't care about British tea and crumpets. How does this affect me? My friends, finance is a virus. It spreads. Look at Japan. For decades, Japan was the magical land where debt didn't matter. They had massive debt, but their own citizens bought the bonds, and the central bank bought the rest. But look at the news from this Thursday. Japanese government bonds are crashing. Why? Because Prime Minister Takaichi is about to unveil a massive stimulus package this Friday. Takaichi is playing with fire. Japan's currency has been volatile. By injecting more stimulus, she is printing more money. The bond vigilantes, the ruthless traders who punish fiscal irresponsibility, are waking up in Tokyo, too. If the Japanese bond market cracks, the shockwaves will be 10 times worse than the UK. Japan is the world's largest creditor. If they have to repatriate their money to save their own banks, they sell US Treasuries. If they sell US Treasuries, American mortgage rates go to 10%. See the connection? It's all one big, ugly, tangled web of IOUs. The core problem isn't just financial, it's political. In the UK, Chancellor Rachel Reeves is in a bind. She represents a government that promised to fix public services. To do that, she needs money. But she promised not to tax working people to death. So, she has to borrow. But the bond market is standing over her with a baseball bat saying, don't do it. If she borrows, yields spike, mortgages go up, and the voters hate her. If she cuts spending, the services crumble, and the voters hate her. This is the doom loop. Truss tried to cheat the doom loop by pretending tax cuts would magically create growth. Reeves is trying to cheat it by hoping investment creates growth. The market doesn't care about the ideology. The market cares about the math. And the math says, debt to GDP is too high. In 2025, the interest payments on national debt for many G7 countries are now rivaling their defense budgets. Think about that. We are spending as much money paying off past mistakes as we are defending ourselves. Let's add one more layer of complexity that wasn't there in 2022, the AI boom. We mentioned that global bond sales hit nearly $6 trillion this year. A huge chunk of corporate borrowing is driving this. Tech giants and energy companies are borrowing massive sums to build the infrastructure for artificial intelligence. This creates a crowding out effect. If you are a pension fund manager, and you have a choice. Option A, lend money to Microsoft or Nvidia, companies that are printing cash and building the future. Option B, lend money to the UK or Japanese government, institutions that are drowning in debt and run by politicians who change every 18 months. Which one do you choose? The corporate sector is sucking up the available capital, leaving governments fighting for scraps. This forces governments to offer higher and higher yields to attract buyers. And that raises the cost of borrowing for everyone, including you. So, let's bring it home. Mark Coombs says a buyer's strike is coming. What does that look like on Main Street? Mortgages explode. If government bond yields spike, fixed-rate mortgages follow instantly. In the UK, we could see rates jump back over 6% or 7% overnight. In the US, we could challenge 8% again. The housing market freezes. Currency collapse. If foreign investors refuse to buy UK gilts or US Treasuries, they sell the currency. The pound or dollar drops. Imports get more expensive. Inflation comes back for round 2. 3. Austerity on steroids. If the government literally cannot borrow, they have to balance the books immediately. That means overnight cuts to police, healthcare, transport, and pensions. It's not a debate anymore, it's an emergency amputation. This is why Coombs' warning is so chilling. He's describing a sudden stop. A heart attack for the economy. The media loves to paint these economic events as unexpected shocks. But as we sit here in November 2025, the writing is on the wall in neon paint. John Studzinski from PIMCO says, don't worry, we anticipate it. But anticipation is not a solution. You can anticipate a hurricane, but if your house is made of straw, you're still homeless in the morning. The structure of the global economy has changed. The era of free money is dead and buried. The bond vigilantes have returned from their long nap, and they are hungry. The UK is the canary in the coal mine. The volatility we saw last week with Chancellor Reeves, and the Truss tremors in the gilt market, are warning shots. Japan is the next domino. If you are an investor, the message from the smart money like Ashmore is clear: stay liquid, stay short-term, and don't trust governments to keep their promises. The yield curve is telling you that the long term is dangerous. If you are just a normal person trying to survive, the advice is simple: deleverage. Pay down your debts. Do not assume that mortgage rates will come down. Do not assume your pension is safe if it's leveraging into these markets. We are walking a tightrope over a canyon of $74 trillion in debt. The wind is picking up. And the politicians walking the rope with us? They're wearing blindfolds. Be smart. Watch the bond yields. That's where the truth lives. I'm Boss Economic World. If you want to understand the game, you have to know the rules. And right now, the rules are changing. See you next time.